more than just a musical theater writer, was also a full-time employee.
The legacy of Michael Friedman.
Running their talkback programs, and was the artistic director of the New York City Theater Encore's off-center program. So a lot more than just a musical theater writer, which is awesome. I had a fun idea, which is there's a list of theater companies that put up his work, and I think reading it fast is just a funny way to sort of wrap your head around the magnitude of how many people across the world have seen his work. Here we go. New York Shakespeare Festival, New York Theater Workshop, Roundabout Theater Company, Second Stage, Soho Rep, Signature Theater, Theater for a New Audience, The Acting Company, Hartford Stage, Humana Festival, ART, Berkeley Rep, Dallas Theater Center, Williamstown, Portland Center Stage, London, Soho, and Gate Theaters, the Edinburgh Festival, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, The Public, Off-Broadway, and Broadway. And all of this before he was 41, so incredible accomplishments there. Cool. Let's get going with some questions. My first one is, and I'm going to open this up to anyone who would like to be the first person to answer. How would you describe Michael's music to someone who's never heard it before? If you saw somebody like, who's Michael Friedman and what's his style like? Anyone want to give it a go?
That's probably the hardest question.
I start out hard and we go from there.
Well, I'll answer a piece of it, and then maybe the other panelists can fill in the rest of the picture. But I would say this might not be necessarily how I would describe it, but certainly he was described by others often as someone who wrote in a number of different voices and genres. So in a way, probably the best description of his voice is that it was a really unique mix, contradictory mix of being both a chameleon in a sense, in that he could go into the spirit of a certain genre, or the spirit of a certain community, or a type of music, or an individual. He did a lot of his songs came directly from interviews or inspired by a real person that he met, and he could plumb the essence of that voice, and at the same time be distinctively himself. And the aspect of it that was the distinctively himself part, I think part of it is just his genius. Like, he was just a brilliant songwriter and an idiosyncratic one, in that, as he would say, like, I'm terrible at song structure. Like, it doesn't necessarily follow a formula. It follows its own organic path that just makes sense. It does always have too many words for the notes in the song, and I think the other piece that I would see in his voice is you were always, I guess especially if you knew him, you had a strong sense of what he was choosing, what he was shedding light on, his ability, in a sense, to be a journalist through his music, even if he's writing a genre song, like all the great R&B songs in Fortress of Solitude. He's both telling you something about that character, but also about the culture that made that music, and you're in it completely. But his point of view and his voice and essence is still there.
For anyone who knew Michael, he had strong opinions about literally everything. It's like one of the best things about him, and one of the things I miss the most is fighting with him about musicals. And one of my most vivid memories involves this question, because we sat next to each other at a performance of The Black Crook, and he had just come back from interviewing people for the New Yorker's Radio Hour program. He just came back from interviewing voters in the Midwest, which we know he had a lot of opinions on, but when he was telling me about turning these into songs, he was like so impartial. Like, he wanted to present people how they were, so we could all make our own judgment calls about it. And I feel like that is in all of his work. He like stepped away from characters and tried to treat people without his own judgment in so much of what he did.
I just feel like, and because he had such an extensive knowledge of
genres and musicals and pop and emo. Like, the first thing I did with him was Bloody Bloody, which was totally based emo rock, right? Because that served that particular voice, that particular story. Then when we did Pretty Filthy, it was, the numbers were all over the place. We had a big, old, like swim number, what is that, like the, you know, the swimming, Esther, Esther Williams type number, you know. Then we had a kind of agent, Steve Rosen's big number,
Yeah.
with,
It's on Spotify and everywhere. It's amazing, amazing recording.
But, and listen, if you just listen to even that show, the wide range of different music that he taps, depending on who the characters were and what stories. She and I got to share a duet. We've done the duet called Applesauce, which is a sweet ballad of a porn couple who yearn to be out in suburbia. So you hear that energy. He was just brilliant at really channeling whatever psychology and then subsequent music would serve that. And these people, particularly, Steve already talked a lot about just the primary source material, all the interviews that he did, a lot of the documentary style here, to add the music. So, yeah, his music is hard to pinpoint because the breadth of it is just so wide and so nuanced, all of it too. It's not like he was like just reaching at different things and kind of did a broad thing. He knew genres very, very deeply, and so was able to just tap it.
The only other thing that I would add is that Michael had such a great sense of humor with his music, and I felt like he would drop little touches of the humor even in songs that were going to 2 lines later completely punch you in the face and break your heart, which I think is just, again, just because of how incredibly big his brain was, and so he was always, like, you know, thinking and feeling at the same time, and so I think there was a sharpness that really would surprise you in so many of his songs.
Excellent. That was very enlightening. I think the thing that stood out the most for me and Maria-Christina is the idea that, like, it's the breadth, but also just the nuance of each of those things. Like the Fortress of Solitude's soul numbers and R&B numbers sound like they had to have been on the radio in the 1970s, and they weren't. They were written in 2010 or 2015, and so that's what's really awesome I think about that is that, yes, the breadth of that nuanced stuff as well. Great. So I'm interested also in hearing about the working style, because Michael sounds like such a character. So I can only imagine, and literally I mean that phrase, I can only imagine what it must have been like in a rehearsal room with them, in collaboration with them. So I was wondering if you all could speak to his sort of personality and work style in terms of collaborating with him and being friends with him and performing his work and how that went.
Should I go first again?
Sure, go first.
Well, let's see. I mean, I think I know I wrote 9 shows with him. I think maybe one that didn't get done, but I worked with him a lot. So there's a large vault of information back there. But I mean, Michael. Sometimes this is a shorthand, but I would often describe him as like that kind of annoying, super intelligent friend that you had in college that seemingly didn't do the reading, and then at the last moment writes a brilliant paper, turns it in a day late, the professor says it's okay, and it's like the most brilliant thing ever written. And then you just have to sort of love him for it. But musically, I think he was doing, like, musically and in life, like he was always in motion. I think a lot of people always just describe his incredible limbs. Like he was someone who had big limbs, and they were always moving and expressing, thinking for him. And I think in my like snapshot memory of him, it's a super kinetic Michael and you caught him for some little window of time. There's 7 different things going on in his life at that same particular moment, and he hasn't written anything that you needed him to write for you for the thing that goes into rehearsal tomorrow, and then maybe even on that first day it doesn't exist, and everyone's a little bit freaked out, but then on the second day at 5 o'clock in the morning, it comes to the surface and it all comes together, and he writes the most brilliant song ever, and it fits into place perfectly. And yeah, I mean, I remember talking to a director friend of mine as we were reminiscing in the months after he died, and I was saying, yeah, one of the most Michael things I can remember is going off to do a Sundance workshop in Utah. We're going up on a mountain, and I thought, okay, great, like we'll be on a mountain for 3 weeks, have his undivided attention, and on the 4th day he was gone. And for a couple of days, and came back. Turns out that he had committed to another workshop in Chicago at the exact same time that he was also the composer for, without telling either shows, and was like, just gonna make it work out. And I told this to my director friend, and I was like, can you believe that? Like, I'm sure that was the worst, like, most Michael thing of all those things. And he was like, no, he did the same thing to me. The 2 simultaneous shows. I think that was, you know, in his 30s, he got a, you know, I think he managed to, like, be a little more in control of the tornado of activity and juggle it, a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, I think just songwriting, having witnessed it happen through him so many times, songwriting is just such a different animal than playwriting or anything else, because you can't just sort of, I think, sit down and labor at it for, like, you know, a 3-day weekend and bang it out. It does come when it comes, and I think just in that enormous brain, so much would happen in the background and then just strike.
A lot of the time that I spent in process with Michael was different than these guys, because I was on his artist board at City Center, Encore's off center. So Michael was such an amazing champion in his work and in other work of just other artists, of other writers, of actors, of people who didn't look like him, of people who were just starting out. And so we got to fight, as I said, like a lot about the musicals that had to do with Encore's off center. But he also, the ones that he was passionate about were so him. And he and I had these long talks where he would go on these crazy rants about Ain't Supposed to Die a Natural Death, and about Promenade, which is happening, which is part of his legacy, and about 4 Saints in 3 Acts, which was this Gertrude Stein musical from the 30s that's unlike anything else. And he got so excited. I don't know how he kept it all in his brain, like the stuff he was working on and these, you know, musicals from the past that were underappreciated, but he knew so much about them, and he was so eager to surround himself by people who knew things that he didn't. So I feel like a lot of the time I spent, like, in a room with him working was, you know, categorized by those things.
Just hearing you say, like, the limbs and the kinetic energy, that to me is also, that's my image of Michael too. When I first met him, I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna be scared of you. Like, I had no idea. And he was also the most kind, like, brilliant, and, like, intense, and, like, you know, oh, well, why are we doing it this way, you know? And then the kindest, like, I love you, you always making me feel like gold too. You know, so this hyperkinetic, intense, creative energy of, like, constantly grappling. Like, it takes you a second to be like, wait, is that a personal thing, or is that are you just in the middle of the creative process? Okay, or we're in it together. Oh, I am your collaborator too. Like, in a way that was so inclusive, and surprising for me when I first, as I said, met him, because I was like, who is this man? Whoa. And God, someone that brilliant, when they validate you as a collaborator, is just sunshine. You know, it's like, oh, me? Yes, yes, Michael. Let's talk. I don't know. You know. So yeah, that's for me. I remember.
Rebecca, anything to add, or something up there?
I feel like it's been said, but I mean, my memory of working with I worked with Michael on, the first thing was was on This Beautiful City, and then workshops of Pretty Filthy, and Unknown Soldier, and then Love Labor's Lost, and Fortress. Yeah, I just, of course, like the thing I worked with him the longest on was Fortress, and I remember a lot of, like, as you said, just a lot of strong opinions, and but the thing was is that Michael wasn't the only one in that room with strong opinions, so there was a lot of, like, storming out of the room, and a couple of hours later, like, very sweetly, and but always coming back, having really done some thinking about whatever the issue was that created the the rift, and I think that was what was so great about Michael, is he really, any of the sort of wild energy was because Michael was always trying to learn more and find the best, truest version of every given moment, and so I don't know, I remember that side of him, but I think something that I loved so much about working with Michael was that, on the other hand, coming in to work with him as a performer on a song could be so scary at first, because as we said, Michael wrote a lot of songs that, particularly in Fortress for my character, and in some of the stuff with Pretty Filthy, and also in This Beautiful City, there were so many words in, like, one short little, measure, and sometimes it was like, what is the melody line? Am I ever going to get this? And as singers, we always want to get it right and make it sound pretty so quickly, and it feels so vulnerable. And Michael was, in those situations, so chill. I felt like whenever I went to Michael to learn a song, he just was so like, yeah, you'll get that, yeah. And then just so to go like da 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 da, and he's doing it, and it's so, it wasn't precious. So you felt the freedom to like find it in your own brain and follow his brain, which was really an exciting journey to go on. Yeah, and the only other thing I will say is that this is sort of adding on to what you were saying, is that he really respected his collaborators, even though there was so much, like, I don't know what the word is. I guess just like
drama.
A normal, drama. But he, when we were doing Love's Labors, I remember that he was like asking me about a lyric, about if it should be this that he had written before, or that now, while he was watching it, he was thinking maybe it should be this, which completely is a different take on the line. And what did I think? And I will never forget that, that he wanted to know, honestly, what I felt.
I just said it was so.
I was gonna just add a couple things I just thought about, just that I think are so unique about Michael as a composer. I think one is he has a really brilliant dramaturgical mind, and he is so aware of the story of the play, and not just the structure of it, but just what that story means and what's being communicated, and how things just sort of need to create meaning over time, and in many ways plays several different roles in the production. He's both writing the songs, but very often, if I was his book writer, he would have the best notes on the book, and sometimes he would have the best notes on the direction, and say, actually, there's this thing that you're doing that you're not realizing that you're doing, and I'm like, oh yes, you're 100% right. Every once in a while, I thought I was right. It was the more infrequent experience, but sometimes, and you'd have your drama and then it would pass. But I'd say that his dramaturgical insights were more than even just being good at theatrical structure, just that he had such a deep understanding of story, which is why I think his songs are distinctive. Like, sort of going back to the voice of it, like they have the the compression of a brilliant short story writer, where a whole world is opened up and revealed in the choices of what's expressed in the song. And he also has such an awareness and engagement with the world, with politics, with culture, with art, like with basically everything. I don't think I really ever came across a thing in the universe that Michael didn't have some relationship to. And he, yeah, and those storytelling skills, he brought that into musical theater in a way that is just really rare and unique.
It's also like, even though he was always running around and running in and out of rooms, he somehow did manage to interact with like every person in the room. And the first time I interacted with Michael was, I was actually, right after I graduated college, I was Michael Greif's assistant and working on Angels in America and Intelligent Homosexuals Guide, ... the Tony Kushner play. And I was definitely like the least experienced, youngest person in the room. And Michael came over and introduced himself to me, and that's my first like memory of him, and asked me my opinions on things and like would interact with me in a way that people don't often do with like someone's assistant. And then the next year I was doing a concert and asked him to sing a cut song from Bloody Bloody, and he said yes. So he was always saying yes to people, and he was always like wanting to interact with the next generation of artists in a way. And he was just so prolific. Like when I think about the fact that in those years he was writing music for those plays and developing all these new musicals of his own, like he just managed to do so much. And you know, I knew so much of his work, but even thinking about it for this panel, I'd be like, oh yeah, and he did that, and he did that. Like how did he do that?
I think the thing that stood out from me from all of that is, like, I applaud everyone who works with musical theater writers for figuring out the magic formula of like how to manage that relationship. They really are it's a very interesting way to say, like a playwright can kind of sit down and maybe knock out some scenes over a weekend, but a musical theater writer, the song has to come. I see Jen tweeting a lot about Joe and other musical theater writer friends. They get their own time, and you know they might be late, and that's very different than a playwright being late, or a director being late, or a cast member being late. Musical theater writers are maybe waiting on this inspirational moment to come. So I think there's a whole science to that too, is understanding that relationship.
Musical theater writer standard time. It's a real thing.
What is a lesser known work or a lesser known aspect of Michael's legacy that you wish were more known? It could be a song, it could be a show, it could be something. For me, for example, the TED Talk that I found as doing my research was incredible. It was an incredible chance to sort of get inside his brain a little bit. It's this TED Talk about how to write a song, so he breaks down his process a little bit, and then Rebecca and other cast members come out. Is there something that you wish that was like, if someone's like, okay, I want to know more about Michael Friedman, I want to dig deeper, what should they look into? And I guess maybe a good way to put that is, besides the 4 big Ds of Gone Missing, All Flavors Lost, Virtual Solitude, and Bloody Bloody, and Pretty Filthy.
Well, I might take this as an opportunity to plug a certain thing that we're doing.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Sure, that's my next question. So you're
away.
right into it. I love it.
So, well, yeah, I mean, it's this isn't one thing, it's just a whole category of thing. I think with Michael's passing, we were very aware of a large number of shows that he'd written that were, you know, many with the Civilians and a few others with other collaborators that, I think we all thought, yeah, everyone knows those shows, or they have a memory of them, or they've seen them, and then with his passing, realized like, oh no, that's actually a very small group of people, relatively speaking, and no one else will know this music unless it's recorded. And so we raised a chunk of money, and we are making cast albums of 9 more shows.
Wow. I'm gonna clap for that.
Yeah.
Can I ask, is Here's Hoover one of them?
So far that's not, but if you'd like to make a generous donation.
That would be my answer to that question, just to say, him and Alex did a show called Here's Hoover at Abrams Art Center a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's
That
wonderful.
I would feel is kind of like a spiritual sequel to Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, and just kind of, there's a recording of it, and I guess grateful to have witnessed it.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is, if everyone listens to these and buys them and tell all your friends, maybe they'll make more.
Yeah, yeah, no, there are easily 15 more shows that we could do,